Good afternoon, Richard. So nice to see you.
How you doing?
So great to have you here. I am so grateful for your time today, and this is a very important topic that we're going to cover. And I just want to acknowledge you because we have been talking to each other for quite a few months now. We're finally getting together, and I'm able to have you here. So thank you for bearing with me with the scheduling. So we are going to talk about a very important topic, mental health of underprivileged communities and individuals of color. This is a topic I have yet to cover on my show, and it is one that is very, very, very important. So when I was introduced to you through a mutual friend, I was excited to hear about your work and the specialty that you focus on, and I think it's super important. So before we dive into this topic, just a little bit about the series. I created Michelle's Conversations That Matter to elevate the conversation around mental health, to empower people, inspire people. I invite people on from all walks of life to talk about their own story, and then professionals like yourself to help really educate us on the issues. So thank you for being here. Professionally, what I do for a living is I work with organizations to teach compassion and resiliency in the workplace. So that's something I'm really passionate about. I feel if we're going to eliminate stigma, we need to start with the workplace to eliminate cultures that have stigma in them. So without further ado, could you please take a moment, introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, where you live, and what you do for a living?
Sure. How's everyone doing? My name is Dr. Richard Booth. I'm a licensed mental health counselor. I'm a therapist in private practice, and I'm also a clinician at Brown University. I live around the Boston area in Massachusetts, and I work with schools, organizations, individuals to really bring a trauma-informed lens to multiple areas of wellness. So self-care, therapy, how to manage feelings, how to work with communities and individuals that have been traumatized, how to better enact policies or rules or engagements that produce better outcomes for individuals, whether in the workplace, such as workplace satisfaction or feeling more comfortable or better or increased feelings of efficacy towards their self-care models and their support, or with schools and working with students of color or marginalized communities to give an understanding of what people are really going through so that you could then offer supports based off their needs and not just our presupposed ideas about what is going on and what the real problem is.
Why you choose to do this work? Give us some insight into your personal connection to the topic and why it's so important to you.
Well, for me, it's important because it's personal. I was an immigrant who came from Jamaica to this country, and this country was a land where you're going to have opportunity. And when I came, I lived in the inner city and I saw a lot of trauma, witnessed a lot of trauma, been around a lot of trauma. And when you're in it, you don't realize just how bad it is. A friend of mine, we were just talking recently, and we were talking about outdoor events like festivals, things like that. And we're little and we would go. And every time we went, we knew that there'd be a shooting. We knew there'd be a stabbing. We knew there'd be some sort of fighting, and we went anyways. And you would hear the danger, hear the shots, see the stabbings, and you'd run. Once it cleared away, you'd go back. And you would stay, have fun, party, and you'd enjoy the company of your friends and other people. And the sad thing is, when you went to school, you didn't tell the teachers. You know, when you went home, you probably didn't tell your parents. So we lived with these traumas. I remember specifically in Boston growing up during the late 80s, early 90s, and Boston was really bad with the violence. And I was told, and me and my friends, we talked about this, we were told to our faces we'd be dead or in jail by 25. You know, as Black men, we're going to be dead or in jail by 25. And us, we vehemently rejected that. And we supported each other and helped each other the best we could at the time so that we could all reach a level of collective success and feelings of self-worth and efficacy. And what happened is, as I grew up, I stayed in touch with my community. And I started realizing as I started being a therapist and during schooling and we're learning. And one of the things that struck me was when you're being taught to be a therapist, you're told to be very, very objective, to be distanced. And I'm literally working in the communities that I grew up in.
Wow.
And I remember the time, when a student asked me, "Where did you grow up?" And I said, "Washington, Columbia." And that's the street that I grew up on. And if you're familiar with Boston, that is very, very, very inner city.
Okay.
And he said, "Oh, okay. So you understand."
You get it.
I get it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going back to school and talking to the professor in the class. I'm like, we're taught to be objective, but I can't. I was like, we were told if someone asks you questions about you, you're supposed to kind of give the answer, well, it seems you want to know a lot about me, but this is really about you. And I said, where I'm from, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
If I ask you a plain, simple question and your response is to be evasive, I don't trust you.
Yeah, trust.
Mm-hmm. Right. So my professor, she said something brilliant. She said, well, these rules aren't rules that are set in stone. These are guidelines so that you have a theoretical understanding that your disclosure should be in the benefit of the client and not just you. And I said, oh. And I started really thinking about, therapy. And as I emerged in my doctoral program, they talked about theoretical orientation. What is it that makes you understand problems, solutions? And I got out of sort of the technique-oriented nature of it and started thinking about what are my theoretical orientations. And as I started working more, I wanted to work more with communities that have been marginalized and people who look like me. I started in that realm because there were not a lot of me's. People who came from the community, who worked in the community, and who could attest to the traumas that we experienced, but then find solutions and help people along their way. And as I started doing that and I got into private practice, I would work with a lot of schools. And I remember one of the days, so, in schools and professional settings, I'm Dr. Richard. And I remembered walking into a school, and part of my theoretical orientation in terms of therapy and connecting with people is people should know you before there's a crisis if you're in a setting where that's possible. So I knew all the kids at the school. So it was lunchtime, I came in and it was literally every kid walked out, Dr. Booth, and we hugged, hi, and everyone. And a kid walked up to me and he goes, who are you? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, everyone knows you and is showing you love. Who are you? I was like, I'm Dr. Booth. Nice to meet you. And he said, you don't look like a doctor. I said, well, what does a doctor look like? And he put his head down. And he said, an old white dude. I said, well, it pleases me to be a young black man. That's a doctor saying hello and showing you what you can do. And he's like, it was like a ray of sunshine. Kind of, postured up and felt good. And I said, that's why I need you to hear me being called doctor. So you can see what you can do. I am no different than you. I just learned to make different choices. So then as this happened, I started seeing that a lot of kids were being mistreated because they weren't understood by the institutions that were there to help them. So a great example is this kid. He had came to the school, just new to the school, and it's an interesting thing when you add sort of racism, color, and others. So he was from Africa, and he had a scar on his face, and he was dark complected, and there were rumors of how bad he was before he got there. And teachers were already afraid.
Yeah.
And a colleague and I saw him first day. We're like, hey, what's up? Come here. And he's like, what's up? We're like, how you doing? My name's Dr. Booth. he introduced himself, and we're like, come in this room real quick. We're like, this is a room where if you feel like you're having a bad day, something, have them call us and come down.
Nice.
We hope you have a great day. We have no problems with you. And we just made him feel at home.
Yeah.
Right. And sure enough, after that conversation, it was my day off. And I get a phone call. And it was my colleague. And he's like, Booth, I know it's your day off, Doc, but we got a situation here. It was that kid.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a misunderstanding with the teacher. And what had happened is she had misread what he was doing and had reacted in a manner that wasn't commensurate.
Oh, wow.
So he was now upset, hurt, feeling victimized. But a lot of times when people have been traumatized, right?
Sure.
And when you look at impoverished communities, the language acquisition and words that express nuances
Mm-hmm.
are not as numerous,
Mm-hmm.
but also adhering to thoughts, feelings that seem kind of weak are
Mm-hmm.
not something that is promoted and endorsed.
Mm-hmm.
So he went with anger.
Yeah.
And it turned into me getting called, and they were like, he's not going to talk to anyone but you.
Yeah.
This was one conversation before.
Right.
We spoke, and I was like, I'm going to be there tomorrow. Can you stay in the room until the class is done? I talked to the principal and I talked to the teachers, and they allowed it, and it was fine. And him and the teacher ended up talking, mediated, and they got to a really good place. And I started making a shift towards working with organizations because I had remembered years ago, a supervisor of mine had said, you're going to start, seeing the limits of individual therapy. And you're going to start to see the need for organizational change.
Right.
And that led to my work with organizations.
Right.
So,
I just see you as this bridge. You must play such a vital role in helping people understand the misunderstood.
Yeah. I feel that pull for that.
Yeah.
I do a lot of training series with, let's say, schools and institutions, nonprofits, and a lot of them are a series. So when I do trainings, I tend to tell organizations, I do a series.
Mm-hmm.
Research shows that if you teach someone or show someone something once and you disappear, nothing happens, right? People might feel good for the day and that's it. So you do a series at regularly scheduled intervals that people know and expect and have common themes that are reinforced throughout, and people can come back and discuss and see what they had success, what they didn't. And the series also says from an organization, we take this serious enough to do, right?
Right.
So I have a series, let's say I work with trauma.
Okay.
And trauma, anxiety, stress. So we first start off with trauma, right?
Okay.
What is trauma? What is the definition? What is a common definition that we can use so that we understand what we're talking about?
Right.
A lot of what I do also is evidence-based. I like evidence. I like research.
Mm-hmm.
I like couching, cementing trauma education in the brain to let people know this is a brain function and a lot of behaviors can be expected. And when we see these behaviors, we shouldn't be surprised. We should actually expect them and do things to help, right?
Yeah.
So when we have physical ailments, right? If my arm is broke,
and
it's in a sling, and I can't reach a remote, I can't pick up a glass of water.
Mm-hmm.
No one's upset at me.
Right. No.
They use words like accommodation.
Yeah.
If I'm depressed, if I've seen trauma, if my limbic system is now overloaded and I'm seeing the world as a dangerous place and I'm in a perpetual mode of survival and the teacher walks too close to me and I have been assaulted,
Yeah.
I react in a way that's protective of me by being a little physical or moving back or something.
Yeah.
I'm now penalized.
Yes.
And anything mental, I've heard teachers say, oh, they have all these excuses for these kids. And I said, if their leg was broke and you had no elevator, would it be an excuse that they have difficulty going up to the top stairs?
Yeah.
So we look it in the mental, in the physical hardware of the brain, explain what different parts of the brain does. This is the amygdala. It's involved in fight, flight, or freeze. This is the prefrontal cortex. This is the hippocampus. And you talk about that pathway and how it causes physical changes in the body and the neurological functioning. It changes how you perceive information from the world. And once we have this information, now what do we do? How do we manage?
I love what you're saying, because it's all rooted in compassion. And that's truly something that I am a huge advocate for. We just need to pause for a minute and extend a little bit of extra compassion, especially in communities like underprivileged communities, individuals of color who have been through a lot of trauma, who, like you explained, you're growing up, like they have experienced a whole host of different experiences that we can't even wrap our head around. And if we just extend a little bit of extra compassion and try to get their world, it would go so much further.
It would be huge. The interesting thing is, I've shared at one of my trainings a story of a student where he was usually very, very high energy. And then the weeks came and he was very low and he was kind of subdued. And he went up to get a pencil from a classmate. And the teacher just had it. Oh, I told you to sit down. You keep it. And the kid exploded. And the kid threatened the teacher and everything, stormed out of the class, slammed the door. And I happened to be walking in. And as I'm walking in, I see him and I just kind of tell everyone to, go back to class, whatever, leave him alone. And I walk over to him and I just say, come on, let's go. And I brought him into my office. I just handed him a box of tissue. And I said, it's okay. Right. And he started crying. I mean, this is a tough male and he's like bawling.
Aww.
And I said, it's okay. I understand. And I went later and I talked to Tisha and said, why would you do that? You know what today is. It was the anniversary of his brother's murder. And it wasn't just a murder. It was gruesome. It was trauma on top of trauma.
Yeah.
And, how, one, didn't you know this? But two, when I've trained teachers and they're like, well, we don't know their trauma. I said, you don't need to know someone's trauma to have compassion.
Yeah, it's so true.
I didn't need to know his trauma to say, you're hurting. I remember working with schools and we will work with kids on finding ways to identify their triggers, to monitor their bodies so they know when they're being distressed, right? And then find signals to alert the teacher.
Right.
That maybe they need a little space. And I've gotten pushback where people are like, but if they get this opportunity to take a step back, won't they misuse it and keep using it? And I would say, name someone who wants to succeed, who will take themselves out of the path to success.
Right.
Unless something's wrong. If someone is telling you something is wrong and they need this to help, why are you not providing it? The alternative is 10, 15 minutes of the class time arguing with the student about no, they can't get this time that they need. And it's dysfunctional. Let's have some compassion. Let's open up our hearts and our understanding. Because sometimes I usually go under the assumption that people care. And I go under the assumption that people mean well.
Right.
So I tell people it's not a matter of sometimes meaning well, it's a matter of knowing. But once we know, we have to act upon that knowledge.
I guess I think every community needs you and your work, hands down. Every community, right? So because misunderstandings are the root of so much pain,
Why?
What would you say is the greatest thing that needs to change? And I have a feeling I know what you're going to say, but like, if we were to take a step back and say, we need to be caring for our communities, what, in your opinion, what would be the greatest thing we need to change?
think we would need to change, for me personally, it is the lack of understanding, compassion, and knowledge. And I mean that people tend to, when situations are not what they've experienced, they do not put themselves in the shoes of others.
Right.
They silo off into their corner of their experience.
Yeah.
And anyone else with an alternative view gets immediately rebuked and rejected.
Yeah.
So if I say, I have seen people get into physical fights over looks and words, someone automatically say, that's stupid, that's wrong, that's whatever.
Right.
They haven't. And I said, but do you know what that really is about? You know, I remembered I worked at a juvenile lockup facility. And I remember I would always talk to the kids. This was before I was a therapist and I even knew what a therapist was. And I didn't talk to the kids about what's going on. What are your plans when you get out? You know, what are some things you could change? What can you do? You're young. You could make changes and all this. And the supervisor, he maneuvered different. And he was really aggressive to some of the kids, like challenging them. And I remember asking someone, like, is that something we're supposed to do? Because that's not what I'm going to do. So one day I was leaving and that supervisor, another supervisor was like, you know, boo, you know, supervisor wants to talk to you for a second. And he got really aggressive and was like, you know, I heard you talking about me there. And I said, excuse me. If you do not like people inquiring as to your behaviors, maybe you should choose different behaviors.
Yeah.
Because I'm new here.
Yeah.
And we were explicitly told don't do A, B, and C. And you're the supervisor, and I've seen you do A, B, C.
Yeah.
So are you not the person that should be setting an example? And he said, see, you're green, you're new. You think these kids are good. And I said, I've had more experience with these kids than you because these kids were me.
Yeah.
And I do think these kids were good and are good. And if you don't, then why are you here? You see, that compassion, when people do wrong, people think we must punish at the harshest extent instead of what's going on, what causes it.
What's really going on. Yeah.
People rarely choose dysfunctional behaviors that lead to negative consequences on their lives haphazardly. You know, so a lot of times I think compassion and also knowledge, because sometimes there's a lot of things people don't know. And part of what I do is I want to bridge the gap of knowledge in the mental health community. You know, I want people to understand what's going on. I want people to not feel shame or to feel that there's a stigma against it. So one of the proudest times when I'm in the community and people are like, hey, Dr. Boo, and people are like, who's that? They're like, yo, that's my therapist. You know, and
and there's no embarrassment, right? There's no shame. It's like that guy is my therapist. Yeah.
There's none. I'll be places and people be like, boo, Doc, come here. This is my boy. He got to come see you. You know, and the stigma. And again, the understanding, when people understand that, yo, this isn't weakness. This is not a matter of weakness or a frailty in you. It just is. And when you've been traumatized, sometimes people who haven't had that same level of trauma need to really open themselves up to understanding that maybe what you're doing is adaptive and protective for you for that environment. It just doesn't translate to other environments.
You know, and I think it goes back to something you started off this conversation with me having around what is trauma, because I think a lot of us have experienced trauma and we diminish it as anything that affected us, right? Yeah. But the reality is we've all been affected by probably some type of trauma, and whether we're acknowledging it or dismissing it, it's affecting us.
And part of the thing is, you know, when you think of trauma, people always think of these huge things, right? Trauma. I was in a place and there was an earthquake and the earth opened up, swallowed people, and I witnessed that. And yes, that is trauma.
Yeah.
But a car accident is trauma. That's an acute trauma. Something that's happened once. And it affects you. I remember driving with a person who's been in a car accident and I took a right turn and their body stiffened up. And I was like, it's okay. And they were like, no, I was like, you don't have to explain.
Yeah.
You know, I joke around, I said, that's your hippocampus at work. And they're like, what? I was like, well, your amygdala hippocampus, after there's a stress response, your body and your brain remembers it and takes a recording of it. So if something happens that is similar, it will actually increase the speed of the fight, flight, or freeze response. So that sharp turn was similar to the turn that caused the accident. So her body, in preparation, made her react to protect herself before anything worse happened. That's an autonomic response that wasn't thought generated, that wasn't, I should do this. And it caused the shame.
What have you been seeing over the course of this pandemic?
Mm-hmm.
Because, the thing that I have a little bit of hope for is because this pandemic has really impacted us in a very emotional way, that we're going to start to talk more about this and people are going to get care.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear sort of what your observations have been, and is there more openness to talking about it?
I think this pandemic is a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
People are hurting. This is probably the first time in a very long time, and definitely in this generation, where we've had a collective trauma of this magnitude that every facet of America can relate to. We've had things that have happened, but it happened over there, or collectively the country's like, wow, that was bad, but I didn't really lose anything, right? Yeah. This pandemic hit and it destroyed the nestled systems that we had created. Mm-hmm. As human beings, we need other people. We need connection. We need to feel worthwhile. We need to feel loved. We need to feel loved. And these systems and cognitive mechanisms that we had thought of, right? How the world was going to be for us, and how our freedoms were, our freedom of movement, our freedom of seeing loved ones, our freedom of hugging, of going to a baseball game, of going out to the park, right? Of education and what that looked like. My job, my occupation, my coworkers. What does that look like? Mm-hmm. And in an instant, it was taken from us. And everyone felt that.
Yeah.
And everyone felt the brunt of what will happen if I see my loved one and I so much as say hello.
Yeah.
We were all potential either A, murderers, or B, murdered just from a hello.
Yeah.
The wounding of that across the country and how communal that is a powerful feeling. And when people say return back to normal, I say, why? Let's create something new. Let's take this collective pain and actually rebirth into more understanding, more communication.
Yes.
And I've seen it. I've seen in certain communities. And by the way, I have to say, I love your title and I love the precision of words and language. A lot of times people will say things like the Black community, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember my dissertation and my advisor, I love her so much. She was this white lady, just brilliant. And my committee was brilliant. And she had said to me, well, you're talking about the utilization of mental health services and communities of color not using it. Maybe there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
And it blew my mind, right? The mental health community has been drilled into my head as the community that helps us. And then you would start looking into the history and it's like, oh, well, it isn't really that inclusive. Mm-hmm. So we have to get new perspectives in, right? And when you look at the language of the Black community, we're not a monolith.
Right.
So if we're not a monolith, why is the word communities not used? And that was from my other advisor who challenged me with that. And it opened up my thoughts to be inclusive. Like, I'm a Caribbean born, raised in America, Black male inner city. Mm-hmm. That is a Black community, but there are other Black communities,
Yep.
and we're not a monolith. So your language and community was very refreshing for me.
Ah.
I felt that. But also, when we're looking at openness to ideas. So
Yes.
for me, the openness of the mental health
Open
field
minds. Yes.
to be more inclusive,
Yeah.
so that I'm not an anomaly.
Yeah.
When you look at the percentage of Black males or Black people that are therapists, very small. It's lower than the population. And it's not just a matter of numbers. It's a matter of people who identify with the struggles and the desire to help out marginalized communities. Because a mere numerical increase or representation doesn't mean nothing if the heart isn't there. So how
Right.
do we get that? How do we get people to take this pain that we're collectively feeling and say, wow, I saw that the world could change in an instant, for bad or for good. Why don't we make concerted efforts to do that? Why don't we talk more? When someone says this happened to me, why is the first question, are you sure that happened? Instead of, wow, tell me about it.
Curious. Yeah. Be curiosity. Yeah.
Right. And empathy.
Tell me more. Yeah.
Right, can I help?
Yeah.
What has that been like for you?
Right.
Now all of a sudden, the conversation can be had and someone could say, yeah, I've had these experiences all my life. What? I've never had that experience.
Right.
If you've never had fear while walking down the street, how do you understand someone who has?
Right.
When you have felt safe your whole life, where a system where everything has said you're okay. So what happens if a system has said you're not okay? And your life has shown that the world doesn't fully care about you. And you start viewing the world and people in it as negative, and you come into situations protecting yourself from the brunt of that negativity. And people will say things like, yo, why don't they open up?
Mhm.
Instead of, hey, maybe they're uncomfortable and I could do something to help.
Tell me what your hope for the future is, because I can only imagine that the young men and women that you're influencing, you are probably helping them be very comfortable with their brain health and maybe even inspiring them to get into this profession that desperately needs more people. What is your hope for the future, as it relates to this?
Yeah. My hope for the future is that people stop looking at the symptoms of a problem and start getting their boots, lacing them up,
Yeah.
changing their clothes from this nice polished look to some sweats and t-shirts, and start looking at what's causing things.
Yeah.
When someone is doing something that is counterproductive to the rules of society and the rules of their own personal success, why is that the focus instead of what's causing it? Right? So if someone is speeding down the highway and they're driving down the highway and the police stops them because they're speeding, and the police goes, why are you speeding? They go, my wife's in labor in the back and we need to get to the hospital ASAP. They get help. You don't focus on the speeding anymore.
No.
You focus on what was causing the speeding, because someone and life is now in jeopardy, right? Life is involved. So when we see our traumatized kids, we see our traumatized neighbors and our traumatized communities, we need to stop looking at just the symptoms of what's going on and start looking at the life that we could be saving and helping and assisting. And I think the change to understand this is life. People are not disposable. People are not cast off.
So you shared before we went on the air that you call yourself water, and I love this analogy. So tell us why you call yourself water.
I feel that when people see me, and I'm usually very calm, I tend to flow with the situation. So if we have theoretically an appointment I have a doctor's appointment at 5, and I get there at 4:45, 4:30, and I'm waiting. 5:15 comes, my doctor's like, I'm so sorry. A patient ran over because whatever reason. And I go, okay. People are like, weren't you mad? I was like, no, I understand that things are going to happen. So I tell people, I want to be water. I want to be flexible. Water flows smoothly. Water fits into any receptacle that you put it in. But also, water is called the universal solvent. And over time, water will break down almost any substance if needed. So I will go along with the flow. I will enjoy and see. But if I need to enact change and enact something, I will do it. But without the extra anger and the hate, and this is needed to be done. Let's do it. And if we need to work together, let's work together. Let's focus on wellness and health and getting people feeling not just good, but feeling like they can cope with what's going on and still continue. Because preparation for bad is life, And so I'm not a proponent of everything is going to be roses.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're going to touch a rose and a thorn is going to prick you.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us what you do to care for yourself.
For me, it's funny because I do self-care trainings, right? And I tell people that the first thing you can do is affirm yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, people be like, oh, time. And I go, well, right now, we brush our teeth at least twice a day.
Yep.
And for approximately 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Usually morning when we wake up and at night before we go to bed. And it's usually in front of a mirror. So is that not the most wonderful time, 2 minutes while brushing your teeth, to tell yourself something wonderful and beautiful that you like about yourself? And reaffirm yourself for 2 minutes, 2 times every day.
That's so easy to do because you're already brushing your teeth. I love that. I'm going to take that on.
Oh yeah, you're already brushing your teeth. I'm again research oriented, right? So research says that if you exercise is incredibly wonderful. And people would go, well, what's the sweet spot? And I go, well, research says the sweet spot is 3 to 5 days, approximately 45 minutes. And it doesn't have to be 45 minutes straight. So you could wake up, do something 15 minutes, and then later on do something again. So for me, it's things like that. It's finding time to read. And one of my biggest self-care is just being with my family. I love the feeling of unwinding and just so I have 2 small children, a 5-year-old son who is the greatest little son in the universe. No offense to anyone who has sons. And I have a little daughter. She is the most incredible little girl ever. No offense to anyone who has a daughter. And I love just being on the floor. And I have, by the way, the most incredible wife as well. No offense to anyone who has a wife, but mine is the perfect one for me. And we'll just sit on the floor, right? On the floor and just play, talk, giggle, and it just winds down. And last one is just going out into nature. It's funny. My wife, she came back from a conference and she started talking about how cortisol levels in people are really increasing. It's really detrimental to your health, mental, physical. And she said, going out in nature and being surrounded by nature, trees, will actually decrease the levels of stress in your body just being in that atmosphere. So these are things that people could do that doesn't take a lot of effort.
I love it. Any final words of wisdom? I can't believe our time has zoomed by. Tell us any final thoughts that you have, anything you want us to know. And then we have your website at the bottom of the ticker there. People can connect with you there.
I think that we should really focus on how we can create environments where people are being supported. I really focus on that, whether it's working with institutions, corporations, schools, companies, religious institutions, understanding what is going on with people from a tangible, brain-based foundation, while knowing that we need to create these environments where conversations can happen, people can feel comfortable doing it, and support each other, being open and looking at what's causing the difficulties as opposed to just the symptoms of them.
Curiosity is everything. Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much for giving us time today and sharing your wisdom. Thank you for all the work that you do to help people feel understood. I think that is priceless, and all the care that you're giving to people that really need it. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you for what you do. It's very important that people really understand that you have to be compassionate. We have to work with people, and work takes up a large portion of our day. So if we're not learning compassion, being compassionate there, the stress builds up and we take it elsewhere.
So true. So true. Thank you so much for being here, Richard. And I hope we stay in touch. And if there's anything I can do to support you, please let me know.
Anything you need from me, I'm here.
Awesome. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.